Hi, this is Jim from Trek World, and today we're going to go over the second video in our series of videos about Star Trek fans and their encounters with the Galileo over the past 5 decades. So join me after the break as we go back to 1977 and look at exclusive fan encounters through narrative, photos, and videos. Please be sure to check out these other popular Trek World videos when you've finished this one. Also, if you hit that little like button on the screen right now, you will be helping YouTube to show it to more people and give them a chance to discover these unique and fascinating videos as well. Remember, you can submit your photos, videos, and other documents directly to us on the web at submit.trek-world.com. The year is 1977. The first Star Wars film, Star Wars Episode IV: A New Hope, premieres on May 25th, and filmgoers line up for hours just to be able to see it. Saturday Night Fever sparks the disco craze, and the popularity of movie soundtracks skyrocket. And in August of 1977, the Orbiter Enterprise takes her first glide test. And we begin the next chapter of our story in 1977. And I've chosen to refer to the grassy knoll for what I hope will be obvious reasons as we progress. Ever since that fateful day in 1963, people have argued until they are blue in the face about whether or not there was a second gunman on the grassy knoll in Dallas. So let me explain to you how a particular place in the Harbor Lake area of Los Angeles ended up being just as enigmatic after talking with several fans. Now, everywhere you look on the internet, recounts of the court battle between Heisman and his neighbors will abound. The story's been widely reported over the years. As the Galileo deteriorated more and more in his front yard, the neighbors became more and more upset with the Heisman family. As you may remember from our previous videos, Heisman's relationship with his neighbors had already devolved to the point where they were openly vandalizing the Galileo by May of 1975. It would take about 2 years after that for the neighbors to have the city declare the Galileo an eyesore and order Heisman to remove it. With nothing left to appeal, Heisman moved Galileo to an outdoor storage facility named Rebel Mini Storage, about 30 minutes away in Carson, California. Well, that's the story. In every book that mentions this tale, there's very little deviation from one account to the other. But the problem is, that's not exactly the order in which things really happened. You see, to this day, I keep getting emails from fans that recounted a slightly different tale. But they all had one thing in common. The Galileo had been seen for well over a year at another outdoor storage location long before it was seen at Rebel Storage. Michael Jurig saw the shuttle from the interstate daily when he was 10 years old. His father actually even retrieved the contact info for Roger and tried to buy the shuttle, but they were unable to reach an agreement. Robert Nasser also saw the Galileo and visited. He actually went inside as the padlock and hasp had either been removed or forced open somewhere around 1977. Notice that he actually references the chairs he saw in the Galileo. Now, as I discussed in our first installment in this video series, no one knew about those chairs. Roger added them over the years in his front yard, but the doors were locked, and only a handful of people were privileged enough to be given a private tour by Roger. The chairs were not in the Galileo when it was donated from Paramount to the Foundation of the Junior Blind, and the chairs were not in it when it first showed up at Rebel Storage later. So when someone mentions the chairs, they may not know it, but they are actually mentioning something that only a true visit would have revealed, and then only for a very specific period in time. And finally, Orbsphere gives us the very best written description of the location of the storage area, right down to the obvious ravine, which is still visible on the right side today as you head from Palos Verdes down toward Harbor Lake. It is at this point that I would like to introduce you to a man who I will refer to going forward as Racer X. We're going to be spending some time with him in the next few moments, and he has a very compelling and unique story. Now, out of request for his privacy, I've agreed not to reveal his name or anything about him that could be used to determine who he may be. But there's really no good way to gloss over this, so let's just go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off, shall we? Now, believe me when I say that I've gone over this in my mind 1,000 times on how to present what I'm about to say in a manner that would not upset certain people on the internet. I will tell you he has nothing to gain from his story, but we have all seen that we have some members of the Star Trek fan community that really do not like it at all when we begin to question what they hold up to be the real truth. Now, they hang out on various corners of the internet and they attempt to discredit anyone who they may not agree with, and disputes almost always turn personal. You can even see one here. They aimed at me. They've been known to attack industry professionals in attempts to discredit them, as if their armchair quarterbacking makes them an authority on subjects that, quite frankly, are far outside of their chosen career path. And as it was recently told to me by a former owner not too long ago, these fans know absolutely nothing about what they're talking about when they make these accusations. So these owners, they don't even want to talk to us. That's a grown-up allegory from when your parents used to tell you, this is why we can't have anything nice. Now, earlier this year, a comment was left on one of my Phase 2 videos that caught me completely off guard. This gentleman claimed to have actually had a screen-used Galileo in his front yard as a kid. Now, after just a quick back and forth, I was prepared to file the comment away as interesting. But it didn't match any of the known stories of the Galileo over the years, and his description pretty much led me to believe that he had actually been in possession of a fan-created prop. So I did some additional research after his comment, and sure enough, I found out that at least one full-sized replica had been on the scene at a fan event in 1975 in Maryland, and just as he had described, it had chairs, consoles, and an internal rear door. So I mentioned that encounter in passing when I did the very first Galileo video. I included the photos and a clip of our interaction in the comments. My point for even mentioning the comment was because I was already beginning to realize that the stories and memories were far more important than the prop. But somewhere, in the back of my mind, a half-forgotten memory was trying to get my attention. Now, in the meantime, others quietly weighed in on the subject. You can see the comment from Verendid9, where they made the observation that two-door shuttles would not have appeared until the movies. So perhaps this is a case of confusing the shuttles? In this case, no. That couldn't have happened because this gentleman's encounter happened in the mid-1970s. The movies were still years away at this point. And it was shortly afterwards, when I was reviewing the video again, that I noticed something strange in the photos and film clips that I showed of the interior of the Galileo. It was at this point that the half-hidden memory jumped forward and yelled, "Ta-da!" The interior set did have two doors, one down to the craft, and one in the back that allowed access to a storage room at the rear of the craft. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you photos of that mythical second door contained within the interior of the actual Galileo shuttlecraft. Now remember that very few of the general public in the 70s knew that the interior of the Galileo was a separate set. So when 10-year-old Racer X saw the chairs, rear wall, and a door that Roger had done in the Galileo, he didn't realize it had been added after the series ended. He thought it had been there when it was used for filming. In these photos, taken by a fan when the Galileo was still sitting in Heisman's yard, we can see the chairs that he had added sometime in 1977. You can also see two separate photos of that rear door. Now, when I was still pondering the situation, I received a follow-up email direct from Racer X. Okay, so I'm no name on YouTube, and I posted a couple of comments in your first YouTube shuttle video. I forgot all about this, and this morning, your follow-up shuttle video showed up in my feed. Now, I watched it, and I was surprised to see our comments exchanged on the video. You attributed my experience to possibly another TV show shuttle. Now, I was 10 or 11 by that time, so my memories of this were rather foggy, so your explanation made me question my memory of this. Now, that is until you showed the photos of the Galileo in the storage yard. Its first storage yard experience in your video showing the collapsed roof section. And it all came back to me. Yes, I had this exact shuttle in my yard for one summer, sometime between 75 and 77, I don't remember, but here is what happened. No, I was born and raised in San Pedro, California. As a kid, I'd like to ride my bike all over the area with my friends. We'd often ride past a large outdoor storage yard in Lomita, California, a town adjacent to San Pedro. There was a slight hill next to the storage yard. We would ride on it and it would give us a great view of the yard. One day, I noticed the yard was almost completely empty. Normally it was filled with old RVs, buses, and decrepit vehicles and such. And I spotted something interesting. The shuttle. Your photos of the shuttle sitting in a storage yard hit me like a hammer, and it all came back to me. So curious, I rode onto the lot and up to someone loading rubbish into a large dumpster and asked him about the shuttle. Now, I wasn't really familiar with Star Trek, but I did recognize that this was pretty cool in spite of its condition. The guy working there said the lot had been sold and was being redeveloped for a housing project. He said the shuttle had been abandoned and that they were going to cut it into pieces and toss it in the dumpster within the next few days. I asked him if I could have it, and he said I could, but you'd have to remove it by the end of the week. We checked it out inside and out, and my mom was in. A few days later, a tow truck driver was dropping off the shuttle in our front yard. It was very rough, and we had to prop the falling roof section up with 2x4s. There was a console inside in the front that was mostly empty holes where lights had apparently been. There was also a swivel seat at the console, but it was a painted plywood prop and was falling apart. In spite of its crummy condition, my friends and I had a blast in it all that summer. A few months later, its charm had worn off, and we had pretty much abandoned it for mini bikes. Another month or two, it was hauled away as arranged by my mom, and I never really knew the details. Wow, what a brain bender. I am now remembering more fond memories about that time unrelated to the shuttle. Genuinely like to thank you for your videos on the shuttle. Now, not long after our email exchange, I spoke with Racer X on the phone, and we discussed his memories. He retold his story, but this time I was able to ask some questions like where and when, which are always really difficult questions to answer when you're dealing with an incident that, let's face it, is half a century old. So he sent me back some screen caps that he had done where he had marked on certain areas of this map where he believed he had actually seen the Galileo at. And what we'll do right now is we're going to continue this thought by taking a look at one of the screenshots that he had shared that had two locations circled. The first is where he believed the storage lot was. Remember, he no longer lives in the area, and he was trying to pull up at best what was an early childhood memory at 10 years of age. At the end of the day, he did feel about 75% sure that this was in fact the correct location. So let's overlay the map that Racer X gave me with a map that I had already started to try to determine where the storage lot was with a map off of Interstate 110 in Lomita. And as we begin to compare them, it kind of looks a little familiar, doesn't it? In fact, if we pull back just a little bit more, you can see that Racer X's storage lot is exactly in the same location identified by about half a dozen other people as the lot that was in Lomita. Now, in order not to taint the well, so to speak, I hadn't shared the details of the people that had told me about this lot with Racer X. I didn't want to give him anything that might influence his story to me. In fact, the release of this video will be the very first time that he is exposed to the fact that several other people commented to me about Lomita even before he did. Okay, there's just no getting around this. This is one where I have to make some assumptions. Mainly because what had to happen next happened between Roger and Racer X's mother. And Roger hasn't been available to converse, and Racer X's mother unfortunately passed away some time ago, so the details are probably completely lost to time. But consider this. The lot in Lomita was closed. The shuttle could not have stayed there. Racer X's mom had to get the Galileo back into the hands of Roger if Roger was going to put it at Rebel storage. So therefore, what happened was most likely one of the two following scenarios. One, somehow they arranged to get the Galileo back to Heisman's house. Or two, they arranged to have the Galileo delivered directly from Racer X's house to the Rebel storage lot. And this pretty much will conclude our time with Racer X. I'm going to leave it up to you, the viewer, to determine how you exactly feel about the evidence that we've looked at today. The reality of the situation is, okay, he could either be mistaken about this encounter, or he could be correct. At the end of the day, perhaps the only person still alive today is Roger, and Roger's memory could conceivably answer this question for us. But things have changed in Roger's life as the years went on, and I'm not going to go on them here into the video because, quite frankly, they're none of yours in my business. But for whatever reason, let's just say that Roger's unavailable to us right now, and without that, we'll never be certain. The purpose of this video is not to establish that it's true or not. The purpose of this video is to let you, as Star Trek fans who have physically come in contact with the Galileo, tell your story. And that's precisely what I've done with Racer X. Now, at this point, we have a special treat for you. Prior to the production of this video, the earliest known videos of the Galileo came from when it was trucked from California to Ohio in 1991. However, in this exclusive video, we are given a tour of the Galileo while it was at Rebel Mini Storage in Carson in June of 1982.
Well, I finally made it to California. Beautiful, sunny LA. And a dream of a lifetime. To actually be here in person on this beautiful day in LA with the Galileo 7, the shuttlecraft from the famous TV show Star Trek. And for you and me, an exciting moment in the history of cinema. Decrepit looking thing is in bad shape, of course, but nobody takes care of it. It's history. And all you need is a few $1,000 and you can restore it. And it should be restored.
Mr. David Silver, who you may remember from his photos of the Galileo when it was still back in Heisman's yard, made the trek to Rebel Storage in the summer of 1982 to see how the Galileo had fared in the intervening 6 years since he had seen it last. Now, David is the only person that I have ever met that made it a point to go back whenever he had the opportunity in California to look at wherever the Galileo currently was. He would go on to spend yet almost another decade documenting his finds. Some photographs that he took here today are some pretty good ones, just to give you an idea of the condition of the Galileo at that time. As you can see, it's not that much worse than it was when we saw it in Heisman's yard. Not much time has gone by. As you look at these photos, one of the first things you may notice is that there are no other trailers or campers or school buses immediately around the Galileo at this point. When it first went into Rebel Mini Storage, it was pretty much an open space that you could walk all around the Galileo and have a clean shot for your cameras. In later years, that would simply prove to be impossible due to the maze of crippled vehicles all around it. Now, before we go too much further, I'd like to introduce you to David's childhood friend, Brian. It was Brian who first contacted me on behalf of David. Since that time, David and I have become friends, and I can say that meeting him as a result of my channel is one of the nicest perks that I've gotten to date. You see, David's a little older than I am, but because of that, he was able to really begin his Star Trek fan experience a good 10 years or more before I could. So he has been all over the United States, as you can see from these photographs. He was on numerous of the original Sea Trek cruises back in the 1980s. They still continue to this day, but they're not run by the same people, obviously. Now, here we get our first good look at the rear of the shuttle since it left the Heisman House back in 1976. Now, interestingly enough, it doesn't appear to have rotted a whole lot more during that time. And here you can see from a photo at almost the exact same time that was taken by Paul Newett for Doug Drexler. And thank you, Paul, very much for talking to me about that. Paul's photo appears to be taken maybe a little bit later, as there are more vehicles around the Galileo than there were when David took his photos. Finally, David gives us the only video found to date that was shot inside of the Galileo during these years.
Well, I made it inside. And as you can see, it's a mess. As I said before, it'll take a lot of hard work to put this thing back together again. But I think it's worth it. Here we are inside the Galileo 7, the shuttlecraft of Star Trek. And maybe someday, you'll be able to take a ride in it too, like I have.
Please be on the lookout for the next video in this series for stories that you do not want to miss. We will meet the man who finally purchases the Galileo from Heisman, and we will witness a miraculous restoration that he does on it. And we will also look at newly discovered photographs from a rare publicity appearance made by the Galileo for the premiere of Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. We'll also take a look at photos and comments from the 20th anniversary convention in Anaheim, and we'll take a look at the third owner as the Galileo invariably begins its trek eastward. Please be sure to check out these other popular videos about Season 1 in our series covering Star Trek in the 1960s. And also, please be sure to hit that like button below the video so that YouTube will recommend this video to other folks who have not yet discovered it. However, if there is only one video that you watch at all today on YouTube, I recommend this one.